The Waves of Tech is the down-to-earth tech podcast for you, your family, and your friends. We remove all the complicated, drawn-out explanations of technology and simply talk about how technology is influencing every element of our lives, from social media and the cloud to tweeting and mobile communication. We talk tech in a different way. So plug in your devices and listen as we get ready to ride the waves of tech.
On episode 425 of The Waves of Tech, obsolete tech products we've forgotten, Google to face Congress, and people still using dial-up. The Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network, modern issues, modern discussions. Well, Steve, happy Sunday evening to you. How you doing today, man?
I'm actually doing very well. Getting ready to watch some Sunday night football since I've been working all day. But here we go with another episode of The Waves of Tech, Dave. And I just got to say, I always find it amazing each week that there's always so much content available every week about technology and news and things like this, and that it really shows that this is just a never-ending moving target, and sometimes every week it's hard to decide which topics to even cover because there's so gosh darn many.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the tech industry. There's everything from, social media and cloud computing to e-commerce to everything in between. Yeah, there's always something to talk about, whether it's rules and regulations. We're going to be talking about some random things today about people still using dial-up, obsolete tech products. We're going to talk about data breaches. So yeah, week in and week out, it's always different. That's one thing I love about doing the show is just every time you and I get on here, it's going to be something new, and it's something that we can share with everybody out there in podcast land. And so if you're actually listening now and it happens to be a bit earlier than your normal routine of seeing this episode in your podcatcher, your podcast app of choice, it's because I'm leaving for out of town, Steve, for a week. So we thought we'd make sure we get a recording in, but we're going to get out a little bit earlier this week. So let's get on with the show, Steve. And let's talk about the 30 obsolete tech products the world has already forgotten about. And Steve, we are not going to go through, of course, all 30 products. We'll have a link in our show notes that you can go through and find yours. But I did want to start with a few, and maybe we'll just trade off, go back and forth. But as you said, the tech world, it's always growing. It's morphing. It's changing, it's revolutionizing itself, it's evolving constantly. And of course, with growth, things become forgotten, things become relics, and there is a lot of nostalgia associated with this. So I wanted to start out, Steve, and talk about Betamax. And if you remember what Betamax was, in 1979, it was released by Sony, and this tech sought to do battle with VHS, which was the common media medium at the time. It was supposedly going to have better video quality, better video resolution, and of course a better console for the cassettes. And it went through a few of blunders, ultimately led to its demise. And it's a complete obsolete tech platform that no one ever uses. But I remember, Steve, our collection of VHS, and we had a few Betamax cassettes in the home for a few of those movies that we recorded. And so Betamax is one that has been honestly completely forgotten from so many years past. You remember having these, of course, right?
Actually, I had both. I had a Betamax and a VHS at the same time. It was interesting in that, even though the form factor of the tape itself was a little bit different, personally, I liked the Betamax better. I guess it was a personal preference, but, eventually VHS won out just primarily on a marketing standpoint versus any technology differential between the two.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I think, was it Blu-ray, which we have now, that competed with HD DVD. I think that may have been the battle for a while. Eventually, Blu-ray beat out. That same thing with VHS and BHS is what we called it. Eventually, yeah, one platform seizes control over the markets. It happens in all sort of product lines here and there across the tech spectrum. But Betamax, if you're not familiar with it, make sure you go look into it. It's quite interesting. What do you have, Steve?
Well, on that same topic, and because it's another one farther down, let's don't forget about the Laserdisc, which looked like a big LP album. It was a disc with movies on it that you had a special player for, and I never had one, but it also didn't last very long.
No, it didn't last long, and real quickly, I used to work at a video store, and I remember when I first started in 1999 was the year I first started working in a video store, we still rented out Laserdiscs. And it didn't last but probably 2 years, and then we phased them all out. But still in 1990, they were still a very popular thing, but they came around in the 70s. So just wanted to add that little caveat there.
Let's talk about Google Glass real quick. I mean, just a couple of years ago, Dave, it was the big hurrah, the thing that everybody was attempting to get their hands on. The plug got pulled pretty quick, because, to be honest with you, we don't need anything like this in today's world.
Google Glass was really strange. I remember, I think there was a conference you and I went to, whether it was Blog World down in LA or New Media Expo out in Las Vegas. I can't remember, but there was two people that were walking around with Google Glass at one point, and we weren't purposely laughing like out loud, but it was just bizarre to see. It was not something that you'd expect to see out in normal conference hallways. It was bulky, it was awkward, it was completely out of place, right? It's not something that ever looked like you would ever catch on. And I'm glad it went to the wayside, Steve, because that was an awkward thing to look at. And what an awkward interaction it would have, with the display and what you would see as far as the user experience. It was a very strange makeup there.
It really was. And, there's a lot of newer technologies out now, but as a lot of things, it's one thing that Google really starts and then stops, as they do so often. So something we also don't see as much anymore, Dave, which I think there's still a lot of utility to them, are Segways. It's those little two-wheel jobbies where you can drive around without falling down.
Yeah, I think the Segway is usually used for like security personnel in malls, for them to go around the mall, square footage. They also travel around like the parking lots. I see them actually a lot with like law enforcement departments for like parking meters and parking enforcement, where they can go around a downtown area and cite and give tickets. I've seen Segways used by that. But I think Segways really, they wanted to catch on for, like local transportation issues, from like home to grocery store around the corner, but it never really kicked off. And I'm kind of glad, because they have a lot of safety concerns, and that's something I don't think we want to see too much on the streets. I want to jump down a little bit down the list, Steve, and talk about digital personal assistants. Yes, PDAs, we remember this. Just looking at some of the photos that are in this link, Steve, I see Dell, I see Casio, Palm V, which I know was a very popular one. We had a Pilot, which was known as the Palm Pilot. And then there's one here, there's a Sony, there's another one, the Compact. I remember, I think it was you or my brother that had the Compact Pocket PC, personal digital assistant. And it was one of the funniest things to see, Steve, but it actually, as you said with the Segway, had some utility. But over the last couple decades, of course, they're no longer needed. We've sort of integrated them into our home systems and also to our cell phones. But a defunct technology that actually served quite a good purpose and met a growing need within both the personal and the professional settings.
I actually still have that PDA. It's sitting behind me on the shelf. It's a HP Compact PDA, and every once in a while I'll pull it out of a case and take a look at it and try to remember what the heck I even used it for, since there really wasn't.
That's true.
There was no, online connectivity with these, so it was basically a thing to keep track of perhaps some notes or contacts. You could do some kinds of synchronization with your computer based on some third-party applications and some things like that. And when that whole entire part of our technology timeline was going on, I really thought that Palm was going to rule the world the way they were going.
Yeah, exactly. You saw them all over the place, and people were snatching those up for Christmas presents, graduation presents, people that got new jobs, people that are transitioning to a new job. We really thought Palm Pilot and the Compacts were essentially going to take over the world, right? And you were going to see these in every use and in every case that you needed. But as everything, it evolves, things become defunct, things become integrated into other products, and we replace them over time. One I did want to mention here, Steve, is Zune. I remember when we first started this podcast, back in 2000, I can't remember the year, 2008, 2009, we used to talk about Zune. The Zune was actually not a bad product at all, right? Where the problem is that it came in to existence in a really tough and already established competitive market, right? The competition was with the iPod. And, the iPod, of course, clearly ran out when it came to the when it comes to the battle of the music pods. But it came out just a little bit too late in the process to really make that consumer jump over to the Zune. The difference is that the consumer had already made up their mind. Okay, we're going with the Zune for this. But as we talked about earlier, the Zune by itself was not a bad product. It was just, I think, the result of it ending was a product of timing within the competitive market when it came to the iPod and the music scene and even the podcast scene.
Hey, Dave, if you had one of these, I think everybody thought you were perhaps a doctor, and that was a beeper. Well, or you were a drug dealer, one of the two.
One of the two, yeah.
But beepers and I don't even know what time frame anymore that this was. Beepers were the ultimate thing for people to get in contact with you. And if you're not familiar, you had a phone number on your beeper, and it's pre-cell phone time. And if my secretary needed to get a hold of me, she would type in this number, and it would beep, and it would say, call so-and-so, and you went to a payphone booth or something and made the call back in return.
Yeah, one that I also like on this list was hard copy maps. All common, all the rage, Steve, when I was growing up, when you were growing up, traveling, whether it was within the state, outside of the state, if you were going like interstate travel, you had that map in your front seat and you had your passenger looking at which freeway to take, which way to go, how to avoid the mountain range, how to avoid the big cities, how to, get through some of the small towns, whatever it was. But now it's the paper maps have become basically obsolete, right? Unless you're doing some sort of outdoor wilderness adventurous journey where you're using a paper map or some sort of, whatever. Pretty much the sprawl of the internet made these apps obsolete. They're not common by any means, but I have such fond memories, Steve, of traveling across the states and within California, just looking at the different roadways, different highways, trying to map out your route instead of just simply putting it in Google Maps, Apple Maps, Waze, MapQuest at the time when we first got over there. But you didn't have the printout, okay, turn here. You had to figure it out as you go. And you got lost. But now we don't have to worry about that. But hard copy maps was something I have a lot of nostalgia. I have a lot of history with those.
Maps were a daily life, and everybody had various kinds of maps in their vehicles, whether it was a local, regional, state, or bigger map to be able to, for two things, discovery and to certainly get to a location. What you would basically do, let's say the name of your street was First Street, so you would go into the chart and you would look down kind of like this index of First Street, and it would give you an XY coordinate. Then on the map, you could look up X and Y and find out where that street was, right? And then you could figure out from where you were how you were going to take certain roads to get over there. And if you were trying to find a certain locale or a business or whatever and weren't able to more precisely figure out where to go, then you would pull over, and in a phone booth, you had the white and yellow pages, and in the yellow pages, you could look up the business, and then you could give them a call and say, hey, I'm at this street and this street. How do I get to your location? And that's how we did it in those days. Wow, it was time consuming. I think back at all the years that we used maps, and it was just the way it was. We didn't know any difference, Dave. And now look, it's just unbelievable how we can navigate.
Yeah, not only with maps and, using the public payphones, which is also on this list, something that's become completely obsolete. Now, if you see public payphones, people take a picture and post it on Instagram and be like, guess what I just found, But to your point is, we don't even stop to ask for directions from people anymore, right? We don't stop at the gas stations. We don't stop at, the convenience stores. We don't ask people in parking lots how to get to certain places. It's all on our phone. Or we can make a call from our home to say, hey, what part of the street are you on? We don't have any more of that. How do I get here? That's really rare. I remember so many times, Steve, exiting off a freeway or a road to go into a gas station. They're like, okay, well, if you have a pen and paper, I'll write it down for you so you remember. But that's of course an evolution within the space and within our livelihoods, and it's some things become obsolete as a result of that.
It's always fun to go back and look at technology of the past, and sometimes we giggle about it, but I'll tell you what, people 20 years from now are going to giggle about what we're using right now.
Absolutely. There's one other thing on this list, Steve, and it's number 28 if you guys are in the show notes here. Dial-up modems. I just wanted to drop that little bit because our last topic that we'll be talking about here in a little bit is about people still using dial-up internet here in the United States and those modems. So I'll just set that little teaser there. But it's a really good list. I do encourage everybody to head over to our show notes, and science101.com has a really good article about all the 30 things. I guarantee there's something you're going to sit back and be like, oh man, I totally used that, or I totally laughed at somebody for using it, whatever it is, there's a good list of 30 products that we've all pretty much forgotten about. I think not forgotten about is probably the wrong term, Steve. I think it's we don't use them and we easily forget about them, but we all have a story associated with them. And I think that's the cool part of revisiting some of these old technologies. So, Steve, let's move on. We have been quite the critics about Google over the last couple months, and we know that as Mark Zuckerberg was facing Congress and the Twitter was also facing Congress over the last year here in the United States, that the one company that was not taking a seat at the table, the one company that was ignoring requests to come and testify, provide analysis, provide information on what's going on within their company and their responsibilities when it came to either privacy, whether it came to elections, data collection, whatever it may have been, Google's that one company that continued to dodge the movement of what we've all been asking for as consumers, what Congress here in the United States have been asking for. And so it has been reported that the Google CEO will now appear before the House Judiciary Committee, originally scheduled for this Tuesday, December 5th, but due to the passing of George H.W. Bush, former president, that has been pushed back, I believe, a couple weeks. But TechCrunch was the one that confirmed that the Google CEO is planning to make an appearance. There's a number of reasons that Congress might want to hear from Google. And of course, there's been some unsubstantiated claims that Google wants to fight back against. They're going to be arguing about some of the algorithmic bias that's going on there. I know House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, he is a vocal critic of what Google has been presenting or not presenting to the United States government. And so, Steve, this is all going to be, in front of a judiciary committee, and the company's chief executive is going to have to stand up there and take these questions. And Steve, I hope we get some good answers from him. I don't know. Last time Twitter and Facebook got on there, it seemed a little comical because those that were asking him the questions weren't really knowledgeable about what Facebook and Twitter do. I'm afraid it may go down that route too, where they're asking the basics of technology and the understanding of how technology works as far as Google's background. But, you can at least be optimistic, but there are a lot of questions. Google is still dealing with internal and external criticisms about its plans to build a search engine tailored to meet China's censorship specifications. Back in, I think it was October, if I'm not mistaken, they revealed a bug in Google Plus that exposed a lot of user data. And of course, Google recently, I think just in November, was dealing with walkouts and widespread backlash, against its handling of sexual harassment cases within the company itself. So there's a lot of points of criticism to make towards Google, but the House Republicans and Democrats alike are going to be out there swinging on some of their pet issues, trying to focus on what the constituency has concerns about, and maybe try and get some answers and set some foundation for the future. What do you think about Google making this trip finally to Capitol Hill?
I think it's, quote, about time. However, I also feel they have provided slaps in the face to our government for their continued refusal of any type of discussion or warrant any type of interchange of information when it comes to Google services. People consider Google as, quote, the search engine. That is really not true. Their hands are in so many things, and it's what they do collectively with all their services that really becomes an important factor. Now, I also want to state that, yes, the other social media giants have come to Congress and discussed things. But to be honest with you, as you mentioned, some people do not understand it. And secondly to that, a lot of the things that were discussed that the social media giants nodded their head saying, we're going to look into it, we're going to fix it, were almost blatant lies.
Absolutely.
Because if it affected, Dave, their bottom line, their dollar, it wasn't going to happen. It didn't matter. I feel that's a sad point of affair when we know, the issues are wide. They cover a wide spectrum, and it's really hard within this show to really discuss them. But in an overall 20,000-foot look at social media, we know that they are not going to play by any game rules. The rules are their own. So we can either live with their rules or we can leave the service. And that's pretty much what it is, unless there is government input, oversight, laws, whatever they decide to do with social media. And even if that becomes a transparency of what they have to do, you can bet your sweet bippy that they're going to find alternative ways to continue what they're doing. Every day, Dave, I think they become more and more and more evil. Google does so much stuff that we are unaware of. And to be frank, my personal opinion is that Google as a whole thinks that their blank don't stink. That's the way they approach everything. They have their nose in the air about everybody, and they could care less as long as they're collecting the appropriate information to be able to spin off to continue making these billions of dollars at the backs of their customers. I'm becoming quite a Google naysayers. Matter of fact, Dave, I have moved the majority of my web browsing to other search engines and things like that. And it's not because I feel that I'm specifically a victim of anything. It's of my opinion that they're too big for their britches anymore. So when they go to Congress to talk, I think as in some of the past ones, there's going to be some head nodding. There's going to be some Congress people that, think they're good and mighty, and I've asked the right questions when they don't have a flapping clue of what they're talking about. On both sides, it becomes a dog and pony showboating experience that gets nothing done. And as we just found out this last week, Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook has really done some, I think, horrible things of late, and what they're attempting to go out and scrape and find out about certain kinds of people, in which they said, oh no, we never do that kind of stuff. And we're finding it's false. And I think the whole thing is pathetic.
Yeah, I think the big thing going back to the Facebook, Twitter, congressional hearings is that we didn't learn anything and nothing really happened as a result of it, right, Steve? I mean, you're right. They're going to get up there. Congressional members are going to ask CEOs questions. They're going to have to explain themselves. They're going to have to tell them how their business model works. They will answer their wide range of questions. They will explain why they do things the way they do. And it's just going to be left at that. And there's nothing that's going to become an outcome as a result of it. And that's exactly what's going to happen when Google CEO takes the helm. And he told the Wall Street Journal, quote, I look forward to meeting with members on both sides of the aisle, answering a wide range of questions and explaining our approach. These meetings will continue Google's long history of engaging with Congress, including testifying 7 times at Congress this year alone. Great. Yeah, that's what he's supposed to say. That's what investors want to hear. That's what, the people that are reporting and the journalists within Google. Okay, yeah, he said what he has to say, but what truly is going to result out of these congressional hearings? Nothing. There's going to be a lot of questions. There's going to be reports of algorithmic bias. There's going to be questions on, search results and data privacy, user privacy, some of those violations of that user privacy. There's also going to be a lot of questions about business dealings, anti-competitive behavior, working with regimes like China. There's going to be a lot of that, but the result and the outcome of this meeting is going to do nothing, right? And I hate to say that because I am naturally an optimistic person. I want some good to come out of it, some sort of reform. But look, since Facebook and Twitter took the bench and testified in front of Congress, what has happened? Nothing. It's the same old, and Google will march along the same path because there is no either financial or legal repercussion for them doing what they're doing. And so that's my frustration with this entire thing, Steve, is that, yeah, they will do what their obligation is to do, and they will make themselves look great. The investors will be happy. Some congressional will be like, fine, we met with them. We exposed some things to the constituency and to the residents of the United States. But that's as far as it's going to go. And I hate to say that, but that's exactly what's going to happen. You're right. And let's also not forget that Google has one of the biggest lobbies in Washington, D.C. that there is. A lot of people, I don't think, know that. The whole thing when it comes to business and the government, and especially when it comes to social media, which, to be honest, is a relatively new platform experience within our tech world. I'm not sure that governmentally they know what to expect, what should be done. It's based on some constituents that may have some concerns or things that are in the newspaper about certain kinds of leaks, or perhaps the squashing of a conservative voice and these kinds of things, which lead it to a political discussion. Yep. And it's truly, honestly, not about us, the users, and the protection of our information. Absolutely. Yeah. It comes down to one political party. In this case, it is Kevin McCarthy, a Republican, that's saying, that there was some bias in reporting and search results as far as having negative stories and negative association with his party of choice. That leads to a discussion. It leads down a path. But Steve, that's exactly what happens. It becomes a political divide instead of, okay, what is best for the user? What is best for the United States? What is best for rules and regulations to govern what these large companies are doing? Like you said, Google is involved in so much more. I mean, we can make our podcast alone simply all about what Google's involved with, how they collect your data, how they sell it, how they profit off you, with all these different companies, all these acquisitions. That's not what it's going to be about. We're going to hit this dog and pony show, as you said. We're just going to go along with it like nothing's ever happened. And that's the unfortunate side of how some of these things roll.
So we're going to see, unfortunately, we had the death of President Bush, which will be lying in state. So things in D.C. are going to be a little screwy for a few. I shouldn't say screwy. They're going to be delayed for a few days. I apologize for that statement. So we'll see when it actually takes place. And I'm looking forward to this because I don't know much about this, the CEO of, quote, Google. Through my entire time, it's been, Larry Page and the other guy. And it will be interesting to see what comes out from this recently new CEO from Google.
Well, let's hop over, Steve, to, guess what? 2018, which means another data breach. Yay! It's happened again, right? And this time it happened with Marriott hotels, specifically with their Starwood properties. And it was reported last Wednesday or Thursday when Marriott said that as many as 500 million hotel guests had their data stolen, dating back all the way to 2014. And Steve, the thing that particularly stood out to me was, yes, there were data bursts, there were credit cards, there was information, personal addresses, things like that. This is the first report that I can think of off the top of my head that passport numbers and passport information and also the lengths of stay were actually scooped up from the data breach. I don't recall a single other, at least reported case, where passport numbers were compromised as far as the information. I thought that was quite telling. And of course, now several state attorney generals are investigating, including Illinois, New York. But this is an international breach, Steve. And what can I say, man? Cybersecurity should be the top priority. And I know a lot of companies take it very, very seriously. Somehow we still have these massive data breaches, and 500 million is no joke, Steve. That is a tremendous amount of personal, sensitive data that continues to get scooped up by the hackers day in and day out.
There are certain types of breaches that are large in quantity, but the impact, to be honest with you, is small in comparison because they don't contain very specific personal information and especially financial and travel and passport information, which truly, based on the volume and what was hacked, is truly a big, big problem. Just in generalities, I mean, I have customers that, to be honest with you, there are times I can't sleep at night because I'm always concerned about what's going to happen. I saw this and I go, okay, what else is new? Right? We could probably talk about one every week of our show, Dave.
Probably.
It's just when they're from a big place, I mean, they become bigger news. And it appears that the cracking and hacking of this they've been working on it for 4 years to lay out the groundwork of how this was going to happen, planting various seeds along the way until they basically did it. Not that you can always do it, but I would recommend, and I've been doing this lately, is if you pay things online, I have now been requesting that my credit card information is not auto-saved, so I have to put it in every time. There are some kinds of transactions that you do that can't because, for example, if you're doing a hotel, it has to be in there for a specific period of time until you've done the check-in and process and those kinds of things, and we get that. But there is some hard information here that is pretty disturbing, and you mentioned passport data, Dave, and that's very sensitive information. Is there a solution to this? Nope.
No, there isn't. And that's a perfect segue into this comment that I was going to read. This gentleman by the name of Jim Mulligan, and my apologies, I can't see exactly who he works for or what even journal outfit he's from, but he said, quote, "If you're accessing the internet, your expectations for security are pretty low at this point." And Steve, I don't know if I've heard 12 words that really summarized my position on security and the internet and cybersecurity at this moment. I mean, realistically, when I get online, there's an expectation that at some point this information is going to be hacked, it's going to be stolen. I'm going to have to call, I'm going to have to change a password, I'm going to have to change an email, I'm going to have to cancel this account, whatever it is. But he's exactly right. If you're accessing the internet in 2018, your expectations for security are pretty low at this point because exactly what you said, we can be talking about data breaches and hacks and potential identity fraud week in and week out on this show, and that's a sad state of affairs. And I know, again, I will reinforce that. I know companies spend millions and millions of dollars for cybersecurity. They take it seriously, unless you're like Equifax and that terrible, terrible freak show that we saw with them. Most companies that I know that I've dealt with take it very seriously, and these hacks are still happening. But I think it's low, Steve, because we realize this is the reality. It's going to happen no matter how much two-factor authentication we do, how many times we don't save our credit cards, how much we sign up for accounts and then delete them automatically. That data is somewhere stored, saved, in some place or some venue that somebody can access at some point. And so my opinion is very much like Jim Mulligan's, that it's pretty low at this point for me personally.
So within moments of the announcement of this large data breach, Dave, the United States senators immediately call for data security laws. Why not 5 years ago? Why not 4 years ago? Why not 3 years ago when some of these big ones happened? Why now? Is it a political demonstration? I don't know. But I don't care what kind of data security law you pass, it's still going to happen. It's a technology issue. It's many things that are rolled into, I don't know how to say this, an atmosphere of planning that as long as there is digital information, it will be breached and accessed. And I don't care, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see any kind of law that could ever be passed that can correct the issue of data security, Dave.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think there's anything. The only thing that they can do is, as this gentleman, I think his name is Senator Mark Warner out of Virginia in Congress. I guess he's the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee and co-founder of the Cybersecurity Caucus, which is essentially saying we essentially have to, in some way, protect consumer data, but what that involves is holding companies accountable, and by accountable he means financial obligations in the event and result of a data breach. You know, holding these companies accountable for how they handle their consumers' personal data. I don't know, Steve, if financial fines is going to make that any better, because, as you said, there's a massive digital fingerprint that we all carry. There's digital computing and cloud computing and storage and infrastructure already that these companies are taking seriously. I don't know what a financial penalty to these companies is in fact going to do. Will it solve some of the gross negligence that's out there, like we talked about Equifax? Yes, that seems like a perfect route. But for, say, like even perhaps the Yahoo hack, that was so egregious and it was so vast and so deep that perhaps that makes sense to penalize. But something with Starwood Properties and Marriott, I don't know if that is really truly fixing the problem, if that's going to make businesses spend any more attention or provide any more security protocols than they already are. This gentleman said we must pass laws that require data minimization, ensuring companies do not keep sensitive data that they no longer need. And it's past time we enact data security laws that ensure companies account for security costs rather than making their customers shoulder the burden and harms resulting from these lapses. I get where he's going, Steve. I think we've all been burdened with that, as far as having to call and cancel and do this, do that. And we've all been stuck in situations like that. But I don't know if necessarily passing a universal privacy security protection law is going to do much at this point. I don't know. I'm kind of side with you, and he criticized Marriott for not taking seriously the threats of such an attack. And if you're making that statement, Steve, moments after the announcement was made, you obviously haven't done your research or even summon the Marriott executives and cybersecurity professionals to really do an analysis on what has happened. So you can't make these gross statements of not taking cybersecurity and threats of attack seriously until you know all of the facts.
It's very easy to talk out of the side of your mouth. When you are making statements without knowledge, it's very dangerous. I think a part of what my comment is truly about is that laws cannot create technology implementations based on security threats or hardware compliance or anything like that increases the security of personal information. And if it's a fine-based process, what good is that? Okay, so they pay $500,000 because your data got breached. That still doesn't protect my information. I'm still compromised, and I still have to go through the processes. A compromised data system, they can't do it for you. They don't have authorization. That can't happen. So no matter what the resultant is, it still comes back to the user that through various types of guidance that you end up the resolution. There is no way governmentally that they are going to be able to assist in the thwarting off of compromised systems.
I think square one, Steve, and it goes back to our first conversation or our recent conversation about Google taking the stand. Like, I don't know what you can learn from this, but the lesson learned from these senators is that just passing more rules is going to make it all of a sudden safer for all of us consumers. And you're right. A regulation isn't going to enact this, this next generation cybersecurity, 5.0 that's going to save everybody's data and it's going to be instantly eliminated after the charges and fees. That's not how the system, as you mentioned, Steve, it's not set up that way. The infrastructure has to be there and has to exist, and information has to be stored in some place for some set amount of time. And it's just not a magic arrow that you just shoot through the sky and all of a sudden, oh, look, everything's rosy and gold and everyone's happy here in cybersecurity land. It's not that way. Do I agree that yes, maybe something on the books will prevent some of the egregious, negligence that some of the executives and some companies have? Yeah, but that's few and far between. I honestly think, Steve, in 2018, that every company knows the risks associated with cybersecurity, and they take it very seriously, and they hate because cybersecurity and the theft of their data, what's that mean for companies? That means a loss of their bottom line. Arne Sorensen, the president and CEO of Marriott, said, "We fell short of what our guest deserves and what we expect of ourselves. We are doing everything we can to support our guest and using lessons learned to be better moving forward." They know that when somebody goes to book something in Marriott or Starwood, this story is going to pop into their heads. So they're not wishy-washy on data security. They're not taking it lightly because they know every story and every journalist or everybody that tweets about this, that's a hit on a reservation. That's a hit on someone's destination for a week in whatever city they're going to, both domestically or in the United States and internationally. It's something they take seriously, and I don't think passing of a single law is going to change that mindset.
Well, let me say this in finale of this discussion, Dave, is that the government also needs to look at themselves because there's a government agency, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, that was also hacked and data was misused, in which I was a part of, and it was a government agency. So before you get too high on your own horse, look in your own backyard. Dave, finally, I want to talk about something I don't think a lot of people still understand about connectivity. Pretty much on our show, we talk about a lot of things that, to be honest with you, are bandwidth intensive and things like that. And what are we talking about? Well, there is still a huge population within rural areas that do not have high-speed internet. And I think we forget that. And that they have very few options, whether it's satellite or, still in effect, dial-up. It's kind of where we all started and began with in the late 1980s. I ran bulletin board systems in which we started with like 300 baud modems in terms of speed, then went to 1296, et cetera, actually quite large devices where phone lines were plugged into and you dialed in and out to various services. And it is still quite a large industry within the United States, since about 9 million people still require dial-up, or they prefer it that way because just of cost is certainly lower in cost. I ran across this by accident. I was doing some other research and came across this, but there's still a lot of companies that still will provide you dial-up internet. And certainly one of the big ones, AOL, is still around, which they have about 2 million customers that are still on dial-up. But some of the other names are probably going to be familiar to people, Dave, like NetZero, Juno, Earthlink, and we could go on down the list, that still provide dial-up internet. As you know, Dave, many years ago, I owned the first internet provider service up here where I live, which was all dial-up, and we had rooms just full of modems. And we had like one modem per 10 customers because you can't have a one-to-one. It's not financially economical. And yeah, periodically you would get busy signals and things like that. But it's very interesting that I think we kind of forget that a lot of us are on broadband and we still complain about what kind of speeds we get. But we need to think back to the days of dial-up, and people are still on it. And also to include, I put a link here to quote, modems. And today modems are basically a USB dongle with a telephone line on the end of it. So it's not the larger size things that we used to have that had to have typically an RS-232 connection and things like this, prior to USB and some of the newer technologies. So when you hear people talking about and complaining about their broadband service, just remind them 9 million people are still on dial-up.
Yeah, that's a crazy part, Steve. And I love we'll make sure we have the link in the show notes, but you go to the Amazon, where you're talking about the external dial-up, in the title itself makes me laugh because it's USB 56K external dial-up voice fax data modem Windows 10/8-7/XP/Vista. And that's the product name. It's long-winded, but you kind of get the point, right? It's sort of a relic, and for a lot of those dial-up, as you said, 9 million people are still using Juno and Net Zero, and I believe AT&T still even provides dial-up in some services because dial-up is often the only choice available to some of these extreme rural or extreme remote areas where broadband installations are not prevalent, mostly due to the low population density, some of the high infrastructure cost. Because Steve, I think in 2018 now we forget how infrastructure intensive broadband can be, right? Dial-up connections to the internet require no infrastructure, right? Other than simply the telephone network and the modems and servers needed to make and answer those calls. And of course, the telephone network is already existing. It's been around for years, and so they don't have that. And it was cool, Steve, to look at, I actually went and looked up the definition, or sort of a little bit winded definition about dial-up internet access. And it's just a form of internet accesses that uses facilities of the public switched telephone network to establish connection to an ISP by dialing a phone number on a conventional telephone line. The user's computer or router uses an attached modem to encode and decode information into and from audio frequency signals, etc., etc. And Steve, that is a long definition to talk about. All right, all these things have been established and how far we have come from simply using that really dumbed down, really low cost infrastructure of the telephone network into something highly sophisticated, highly robust, and very expensive when it comes to infrastructure cost as far as broadband, high-speed connectivity. But Steve, looking at the 9 million people, I mean, I couldn't imagine still being on dial-up. We used dial-up when I was in high school doing reports, trying to do research, and yelling at people down the hall and down the stairs that, hey, don't pick up the phone because I'm on the internet, and the fear of getting, dropped from there. But yeah, today's modems, today's connectivity, high speeds, when we have everything on our phones, the thought of going back to a dial-up absolutely scares the heck out of me, if I'm being completely honest. But for those that are in those really remote rural areas, it makes a lot of sense for them because it's the only option for them.
I think my point of this entire segment in this story, Dave, is that we can't forget that there are different spectrums when it comes to our technology, and not just based on internet access, but it could be on phone type and perhaps entertainment types and various things. There are different avenues, different strategies, different technologies that we all have decisions to make on terms of what is best for us. And here, access to the internet is one of those things that we still have the old and the new, and certainly the benefits or the drawbacks to each.
Yeah, the old and new still providing information that we need. And Steve, I think it comes down to priority, right? If we wanted better, stronger, faster, quicker internet, we're going to pay for it here within, say, our city limits or wherever you're at. And for those that just don't really care, that don't want to have this high-speed internet, they're comfortable with dial-up, or they're not using the internet or these streaming services like many others are, so be it. They don't want to pay for it. There's no need for it. And so I think it just comes down to, again, personal choice. We've talked about it. And what sort of internet experience do you want? And if it's slow and very vintage, fine, so be it. You have access to it at least. And, for us, I think it's a little different with podcasting and streaming services and connectivity. But for some people, the 9 million people still using dial-up may not just be a priority to them overall in their lifestyle.
My recommendation is don't attempt to stream a movie. That's it.
Well, Steve, I think that's going to wrap up episode 425 of the podcast. Man, 425, it's weird to say that. It keeps growing, of course, week by week, but we're happy to bring it to you. So I'll let you have the last words before we get out of here.
Well, it's great to be back, Dave, and I hope you have a safe travels, this entire week, and appreciate you coming on a Sunday so we can get this recorded and get released. It's always fun to, take a peek. We started off with looking at some technologies and apparatuses that are no longer in existence and kind of ask ourselves, why do we even have them? Leading up through big hacks and cracks within systems that potentially lead to governmental intervention to dial-up internet, which makes me shake in my boots when I think about it. So, Dave, it's always great to talk about these various levels, where we've been, where we're going, and looking forward to next week to see who knows what might be on the shelf that we can talk about.
Absolutely. That's, again, one of the cool things about what we do here on the Waves of Tech is just sharing the random, this is a very random collection of technology news and notes that matter, and that's why we talk about it, and we enjoy it. We hope you guys too. I'm sure you do. So with that said, we appreciate you all tuning in to episode 425. The Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to keep on teching.